The map of the world is being redrawn, not with ink, but with the threat of steel. President Donald Trump has returned to the Oval Office with a singular fixation-level objective that has stunned the Atlantic Alliance. He wants Greenland, not as a leased base, not as a partner, but as American soil. The request, initially dismissed in 2019 as an absurd real estate fantasy, has mutated into a full-blown geopolitical crisis in 2026. It is no longer a joke. It is a directive. The catalyst was the lightning raid on Venezuela in early 2025, which saw the capture of Nicolas Maduro. That operation shattered the norms of sovereignty and signaled a new era of unbridled American unilateralism. Washington has now pivoted north. The logic applied to Caracas is being applied to Nuuk. What America needs, America takes. The White House has declared the acquisition of the world's largest island an absolute necessity for the survival of the United States. This is the doctrine of the Golden Dome, a proposed missile defense shield that cannot function without the Arctic keystone. Denmark, a founding member of NATO, stands in the crosshairs. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has refused to sell, triggering a diplomatic standoff that threatens to dismantle the Western alliance. Tariffs have been threatened. Troops have been mobilized. European allies are rushing forces to the ice in a desperate bid to hold the line called Operation Arctic Endurance. This report provides an exhaustive analysis of the crisis, the history, the strategic imperatives, and the terrifying endgame. We are witnessing the death of the post-Cold War order. It is dying on the glaciers of Greenland. Part 1. The Strategic Imperative, the Golden Dome Doctrine. To understand the crisis, one must first understand the architecture of the President's vision. In January 2025, Executive Order 14,186 was signed, authorizing the construction of the Golden Dome. This is not merely an upgrade to existing systems. It is a reimagining of homeland defense. The goal is a hermetic shield against all classes of aerial threats, from ballistic missiles to hypersonic glide vehicles. The President has publicly stated that Greenland is vital to this architecture. Without Greenland, the Golden Dome is physically and mathematically impossible. The science of interception dictates this reality. A missile launched from the Eurasian landmass toward the United States follows a great circle route. This trajectory takes the warhead directly over the North Pole. Greenland sits beneath the apex of this flight path, the high ground of the Northern Hemisphere. Existing radars in Alaska and the UK scan the flanks, but the center is porous. Greenland provides the only landmass capable of hosting the mid-course tracking sensors required for intercept. Hypersonic weapons, which maneuver in the upper atmosphere, compound the problem. They fly below the horizon of traditional early warning radars until it is too late. To hit a bullet with a bullet, you must see it from launch to impact. Greenland offers the look-down geometry necessary to maintain a continuous track on these maneuvering targets. The Golden Dome requires interceptor batteries to be stationed directly in the path of the threat. This creates a shoot-look-shoot opportunity. Engage the target over the Arctic, assess the kill, and engage again if necessary. Without sovereignty over the island, the U.S. relies on the permission of the Danish government to pull the trigger. In a hypersonic war, where decision loops are measured in seconds, consultation is a fatal luxury. The White House argues that American survival cannot be outsourced to a foreign parliament. Thus, the lease must become a deed. The Venezuelan precedent, the shadow of Caracas, looms large over the Arctic. The successful extraction of Nicolas Maduro was a proof of concept for the administration's new foreign policy. It demonstrated that the U.S. military could execute complex regime change operations with impunity. It signaled to the world that international law is a flexible concept when American interests are at stake. European capitals watched the Venezuela raid with a mix of awe and horror. They realized that the guardrails were gone. When Trump turned his eyes to Greenland, immediately afterward. The threat was credible. We took the bad guy in the south. We'll take the strategic ground in the north, is the unspoken message. The administration has explicitly linked the two events in its rhetoric. They are framing Greenland not as a land grab, but as a stabilization operation against hostile Chinese and Russian influence. The president has stated that if the U.S. does not take Greenland, Russia or China will. This binary worldview leaves no space for Danish neutrality. It is a with us or against us ultimatum delivered to a NATO ally. The psychological impact of the Venezuela operation cannot be overstated. They know now that the president is willing to use force. The absurd discussion of 2019 has become the existential crisis of 2026. The physics of the North geography is the one adversary that cannot be negotiated with. The Arctic Ocean is the Mediterranean of the future, the Central Sea of the 21st century. Russia has militarized its northern coast with a string of new bases. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is building icebreakers to forge a polar Silk Road. Greenland is the unsinkable aircraft carrier that dominates this new ocean. It anchors the GIUK gap, the maritime choke point between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. For the Russian Northern Fleet to reach the Atlantic, they must pass through this gap. Control of Greenland allows the U.S. to bottle up Russian submarines before they can threaten the East Coast. Modern Russian submarines, like the Yasen class, carry land attack cruise missiles. If they breach the GIUK gap, they put Washington, D.C. within range. The U.S. Navy needs unrestricted access to Greenland's fjords for anti-submarine warfare. They need to fly P-8 Poseidon patrols from Thule and new bases in the south. Crewing agreements allow this, but they are subject to political winds in Copenhagen. A future left-wing government in Denmark could restrict U.S. nuclear-capable platforms. The Trump doctrine seeks to eliminate that variable. Total control ensures that the unsinkable carrier never refuses a landing clearance. Part 2. The Deep History. The 1867 Vision. This is not a new idea. It is a resurrected ghost of manifest destiny. In 1867, Secretary of State William Seward negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia. He did not intend to stop there. Seward saw the North American continent as a single strategic entity that should be under one flag. He commissioned a report from the State Department on the resources and value of Greenland. The report concluded that the island was rich in minerals and vital for controlling the North Atlantic. Seward opened negotiations with Denmark to buy both Greenland and Iceland. A price was even discussed, $5.5 million in gold. The deal fell apart because Congress was exhausted by the Civil War and Reconstruction. They saw no value in Seward's icebox, let alone a second one. But the file remained in the State Department archives. It established the precedent. Greenland is geographically North American and therefore should be politically American. The 1946 gold offer, the second major attempt, came in the aftermath of World War II. The war had proven the strategic value of the island. Weather stations there were crucial for the D-Day landings. General Hop Arnold, the architect of the U.S. Air Force, declared that the next war would be fought over the North Pole. President Harry Truman took this warning to heart. In 1946, Truman authorized a secret offer to the Danish government. He offered $100 million in gold bars for the outright purchase of Greenland. In today's currency, that is approximately $1.5 billion. He also suggested a land swap, trading parts of Point Barrow, Alaska, for strategic zones in Greenland. The Danes refused. They were rebuilding from Nazi occupation and viewed the sale of territory as a national humiliation. However, they recognized the security reality. They agreed to the 1951 Defense of Greenland Agreement, which granted the U.S. extensive basing rights. This was the compromise that defined the Cold War. The U.S. got to milk the bases without buying the cow, the island. Project Blue Jay to secure the North. the U.S. launched one of the largest secret construction projects in history. Codenamed Project Blue Jay, the construction of Thule Air Base began in 1951. An armada of 120 ships sailed into the Arctic waters, carrying 12,000 men. They had a window of only 104 days before the ice locked them out. They built a modern city on the permafrost in total secrecy. The scale was staggering: a 10,000-foot runway, massive hangars, and the precursors to the BMEW's radar system. The Danish public was largely kept in the dark about the extent of the American presence. Thule became a state within a state, operating under U.S. military law. It was from here that the Strategic Air Command monitored the Soviet Union. It was here that nuclear-armed B-52 bombers stood on 24-hour alert. The base represents a massive sunk cost investment by the United States. Billions of dollars of infrastructure sit on Danish land. Trump's argument is that the U.S. has effectively paid for the island through protection and investment. He views the purchase as simply formalizing a reality that has existed since 1951. Part 3. The treasure under the ice, the rare earth monopoly. The crisis is not just about missiles, it is about the dirt itself. Greenland holds one of the largest undeveloped deposits of rare earth elements, REs, on the planet. These minerals, neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, are the building blocks of the 21st century economy. They are essential for electric vehicles, wind turbines, and advanced guidance systems. Currently, China controls over 90% of the global processing capacity for these minerals. This monopoly is a strategic chokehold on the U.S. defense industrial base. An F-35 fighter jet requires hundreds of pounds of rare earths. A Virginia-class submarine requires thousands. If Beijing restricts exports, the U.S. military grinds to a halt. Greenland is the breaker of this monopoly. The deposits at Cape Venifield and Tambrise alone could supply the Western world for decades. This makes the island an economic prize of incalculable value. The Cape Venifield Standoff, the Cape Venifield project, is the epicenter of the resource war. It is a geological anomaly, a massive deposit of rare earths mixed with significant quantities of uranium. The project is owned by Energy Transition Minerals, an Australian firm, but the largest shareholder is Sheng Resources, a Chinese state-linked company. This ownership structure is a red line for Washington. A Chinese company sitting on a strategic asset in the North Atlantic is unacceptable to the Pentagon. In 2021, the Greenlandic government passed a ban on uranium mining, effectively halting the project. The company has sued the governments of Greenland and Denmark for $11.5 billion in damages. The U.S. views this legal limbo as an opportunity to intervene. If the U.S. acquires sovereignty, it can override the local ban. It can oust Sheng Resources and install American mining majors. It can turn Cape Venifield into a national defense stockpile asset. The uranium content, once a liability, becomes a strategic reserve for U.S. nuclear reactors. The annexation effectively nationalizes the mine for the American war machine. The Tambrise intervention, just south of Cape Venifield, lies the Tambrise deposit. This site is rich in heavy, rare earths, but low in uranium, making it easier to develop. The owner, Australian geologist Greg Barnes, has been at the center of a geopolitical tug-of-war. He revealed that U.S. officials visited him repeatedly with a single message: do not sell to China. In 2025, the pressure yielded results. A U.S.-based company, Critical Metals Corp., signed a deal to acquire a controlling interest in Tambrise. This was a direct, state-backed intervention to secure the supply chain. But buying a mine is not enough for the Trump administration. Mines need ports, power, and roads. They need a friendly legal environment. By buying the island, the U.S. secures the entire ecosystem. They can fast-track permits that currently take years in the Danish bureaucracy. They can build nuclear power plants to run the crushers. They can create a vertically integrated supply chain from the mine to the missile. The valuation models: how do you price a country? Economists have struggled to put a number on the deal. The 1946 offer of $100 million in gold would be roughly $1.5 billion today, adjusted for GDP growth. A similar offer today might range from $12.9 billion to $19.6 billion. However, the mineral wealth changes the calculus entirely. Estimates of the in-ground value of the resources range from $1.1 trillion to $3 trillion. Even with the high cost of extraction in the Arctic, the asset is undervalued. Financial analysts have compared it to the Louisiana Purchaser, speculative, but that pays off for centuries. Some proposals have floated the idea of a signing bonus for every Greenlander. A $50 billion buyout would allow for a cash payment of nearly $1 million per resident. This checkbook diplomacy is designed to bypass the politicians and appeal directly to the people. It asks a simple question: do you want to be poor Danes or rich Americans? For a population dependent on Danish subsidies, it is a dangerously seductive offer. The U.S. is betting that national identity has a price tag. Part 4. The diplomatic collapse. The fiery phone call, the personal relationship between Donald Trump and Mette Frederiksen has disintegrated. In January 2026, the two leaders held a phone call the European officials described as horrendous. Trump abandoned diplomatic pleasantries and moved straight to threats. K demanded the sale of Greenland and brushed aside Frederiksen's objections. K, when she repeated that Greenland was not for sale, he reportedly became aggressive. He called her refusal unfriendly and nasty. He threatened to withdraw U.S. protection from Denmark. If you don't help us with the Golden Dome, why should we help you with Russia? Was the subtext. The call lasted 45 minutes, leaving the Danish Prime Minister shaken. Sources say the Danes went into crisis mode immediately after hanging up. This was not a negotiation, it was a shakedown. The president was treating a NATO ally like a delinquent tenant. It's the Washington failure in a desperate attempt to de-escalate. Danish and Greenlandic officials flew to Washington. Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen and Greenland's Vivian Motzfeldt met with Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary Marco Rubio. They hoped to find a middle ground. They offered increased U.S. access, more bases, more cooperation. Vance and Rubio were unmoved. They stuck to the script. Sovereignty is the only solution. They argued that Denmark, a small nation of 6 million, lacked the capacity to defend the Arctic. Two dog sleds won't do it, Trump mocked on Truth Social. The meeting ended in a fundamental disagreement. Vivian Motzfeldt left the White House in tears. She later described the pressure as intense and overwhelming. It was the realization that the U.S. was not listening to reason. They were facing an empire that had made up its mind. The diplomatic track had reached a dead end, the tariff weapon. When diplomacy failed, Trump reached for his favorite weapon, tariffs. He announced a punitive 10% tariff on goods from Nordic countries. Effective February 1st, 2026. He warned that this would rise to 25% by June if the Greenland issue was not resolved. This is economic warfare against an ally. Up the tariffs target key Danish industries, pharmaceuticals, Novo, Nordisk, shipping, Maersk, and wind energy Vestas. A 25% hit would devastate the Danish economy. The logic is brutal. Make the cost of keeping Greenland higher than the pain of losing it. Trump is squeezing the Danish wallet to force a political concession. The business community in Copenhagen is reeling. They're caught between national pride and financial ruin. This move has alienated the entire European Union. It is a violation of WTO rules and NATO solidarity, but the White House does not care. The goal is the island. Part 5. The military standoff. Operation Arctic Endurance. Europe has realized that words are not enough. To deter an American annexation, they must put boots on the ice. In January 2026, Denmark announced Operation Arctic Endurance. This is a multinational military exercise designed to establish a permanent presence in Greenland. Troops from France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, the UK, and the Netherlands have deployed to the island. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot confirmed French participation, stating, Greenland has chosen Europe. These are not large divisions. They are tripwire forces, small units of elite troops, French Alpine hunters, British Royal Marines, stationed in key locations. Their purpose is political signaling. If the U.S. were to launch a unilateral military intervention, they would encounter European soldiers. It raises the stakes from a bilateral dispute to a NATO civil war. The presence of Swedish and German troops is a direct challenge to the U.S. claim that Denmark cannot defend the island. Denmark has also announced a massive increase in defense spending for the Arctic. They are buying drones, satellites, and new patrol ships. They are trying to prove they are a capable partner to negate Trump's argument. But in the eyes of the Pentagon, it is too little, too late. The nuclear option. NATO's collapse. The crisis threatens to shatter the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Article 5 states that an attack on one is an attack on all. Okay. But what happens when the attack comes from the leading member? Okay. Danish Prime Minister Frederiksen has warned that a U.S. attack on Greenland would mean the end of NATO. If the U.S. annexes territory from an ally, the trust that binds the alliance evaporates. Germany and France have backed Denmark, fearing they could be next. They take Greenland today. Do they take the Azores tomorrow? Asks a French diplomat. The alliance is fracturing into two camps. The Atlanticists, who want to appease the U.S., and the Europeans, who want strategic autonomy. Trump has suggested that NATO is obsolete without U.S. control of the Arctic. NATO becomes far more formidable with Greenland in the hands of the United States, he posted. He is framing the annexation as a service to the alliance. He is saving NATO from its own weakness, whether it wants to be saved or not. The Greenlandic resistance caught between these titans are the 56,000 people of Greenland. They have watched the escalation with growing dread. The Hands-Off Greenland movement has mobilized thousands of protesters in Nuuk, in Copenhagen. They wave the Erfalasuput Greenlandic flag and chant, "Not for sale." Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen has issued a defiant rejection of the U.S. offer. If we have to choose between the U.S. and Denmark, we choose Denmark, he declared. This is a significant shift. Historically, Greenlandic politicians have pushed for independence from Denmark. But faced with the American wolf, they have embraced the Danish shepherd. They feared the loss of their culture, their language, and their welfare state. They look at Puerto Rico and Guam and see a future of second-class citizenship. They know that to Trump, they are tenants on a strategic asset. Motzfeldt's tears in Washington were not just frustration. They were fear for her people's existence as a nation. They are fighting a hybrid war against the world's superpower. They are using their voice, their votes, and their bodies to block the sale. Part 6. The Endgame Scenarios. Scenario 1. The squeeze attrition. The most likely path is a prolonged siege. The tariffs remain. The U.S. blocks investments. The legal pressure on KVL intensifies. The U.S. uses its leases in perpetuity clause to expand Thule unilaterally. They slowly choke the Greenlandic economy until the block grant is insufficient. Denmark, bleeding from trade sanctions, eventually forces Greenland to the table. A shared sovereignty agreement is signed. The U.S. takes control of defense, foreign policy, and resources. Greenland keeps its flag and domestic laws. It is annexation in all but name. Scenario 2. The break unilateral action. Trump loses patience. He cites imminent threat from Russia or China as a pretext. He recognizes a splinter group in Greenland as the legitimate government. He deploys the 82nd Airborne to secure the airports and mines. Denmark orders its troops not to fire. The EU issues condemnations, but does nothing. The U.S. occupies the island. NATO enters a coma. The Golden Dome is built. Scenario 3. The shield holds stalemate. Europe calls the bluff. They impose counter-tariffs on U.S. tech and agriculture. The trade war triggers a global recession. The U.S. Congress, led by Democrats and isolationist Republicans, blocks funding for the purchase. The Pentagon advises against a hostile takeover of a friendly nation. Trump declares victory. We made them pay more for defense, and moves on. Greenland remains Danish, but the relationship is permanently scarred. The Arctic remains a militarized zone. Conclusion: the melting order, the battle for Greenland, is a microcosm of the New World disorder. It demonstrates that the era of rules-based diplomacy is over. We have returned to the age of empires, where land is power and small nations are pawns. President Trump sees the melting ice not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. He sees a fortress to be built and a treasure to be claimed. His pursuit of Greenland is rational, ruthless, and consistent with his America First doctrine. For Denmark, it is a trauma. For Europe, it is a wake-up call. For the Inuit, it is a struggle for survival. The Golden Dome may never be built, but the ice curtain has already descended. The top of the world is no longer a quiet place. It is the most dangerous real estate on Earth.